Hello, hi, how are you? Welcome on in to another podcast by George. Yeah, that little jingle says border to border and coast to coast. That's from my WHO days. I used to do the news on Country Music USA on WHO, and it was 50,000 watt clear channel. We went all across North America, really, and bounced around the world on WHO. But today we're going to bounce around the world. We're going to go on the other side of the globe again, far outside the border to border, coast to coast. We're going back to Kyiv. We're going to Ukraine, and we're going to talk to our buddy Serge. He's out there on the live line, and I'm going to get to him very quickly. I hope you saw the promo here for what we're going to be talking about today, from Gaza to Ukraine, the two fronts, the two wars that are going on concurrently, and the United States commitment to either one or both. That's what we're going to be talking about today. But I wanted to go ahead and preview the news here, bring this up on screen, because we got to talk about Gaza first and foremost today. Spend a little bit of time on this. Gaza hospitals are overwhelmed with patients and desperately low on supplies as the invasion looms. Now, this is the most recent news as I have it out of Gaza. Medics in Gaza warned Sunday that thousands could die as hospitals packed with wounded people ran desperately low on fuel and basic supplies. Palestinians in the besieged coastal enclave struggled to find food, water, and safety ahead of an expected Israeli ground offensive in the war sparked by Hamas's deadly attack. Israeli forces, supported by a growing deployment of U.S. warships in the region, positioned themselves along Gaza's border and drilled for what Israel said would be a broad campaign to dismantle the militant group. A week of blistering airstrikes have demolished entire neighborhoods, but failed to stem militant rocket fire into Israel. And I hope that you've seen that. Again, I'm trying to see both sides of this equation, but so far I'm only seeing one side. I'm seeing the oppressed, those people in Palestine, those people in Gaza. They're ducks in a barrel, and they're saying blood is running in the streets. I don't know if you've seen the statistics, but 1,000 bombs a day have already begun raining down on Gaza. That's before this big ground offensive that everybody's talking about. The Gaza Health Ministry said 2,670 Palestinians have been killed and 9,600 wounded since the fighting erupted, more than in the 2014 Gaza war, which lasted over 6 weeks. That makes this the deadliest of the 5 Gaza wars for both sides. And again, we just become kind of, indoctrinated in this blood and destruction. And they're saying the streets reek of blood already in Gaza. My God, those casualty counts that we're talking about, we're going to get into that in Ukraine with Serge here just in a minute. I mean, these are just astronomical. It's hard to get your head around, and you kind of wonder what's going to happen. Well, here's the guy that I go to, and everybody knows this. This is the great Chris Hedges. He's been on my show. This guy is a Pulitzer Prize winning former New York Times war correspondent. He spent 7 years as the Middle East bureau chief for the New York Times. He's reported from war zones all over the globe. He's got the bona fides like I don't think anybody else in the world does. I mean, and besides that, he's an ordained minister on top of everything. He has a seminary degree. He says this way for the genocide, ladies and gentlemen. Washington and European governments are cheerleading Israel's genocidal campaign in Gaza. The failure to intervene to halt the carnage threatens to ignite violence throughout the region, says Chris Hedges. To continue here, what he says is, I've been in urban warfare in El Salvador, Iraq, Gaza, Bosnia, and Kosovo. Once you fight street by street, apartment block by apartment block, there is only one rule: kill anything that moves. That's what we're looking at here. Forget all about this strategic strike shit, because that's what it is. He says the talk of safe zones, the reassurance of protecting civilians, the promises of surgical and targeted airstrikes, the establishment of safe evacuation routes, the fatuous explanation that civilian dead were caught in the crossfire, the claim that the homes and apartment buildings bombed into rubble were the abode of terrorists, or that errant Hamas rockets were responsible for the destruction of schools and medical clinics, is part of the rhetorical cover to carry out indiscriminate slaughter. And he's talking, Chris Hedges, go to his Substack and read this. If they carry out what is planned, what they have threatened to do, we're talking about casualties not in the thousands, not in the tens of thousands, but perhaps hundreds of thousands. My God. And this could all go sideways, folks. I mean, we're sitting here at our jobs, at our desks, doing live streams today. I am anyway. And this, if this goes sideways, if Hezbollah, if Iran gets involved in this thing, it's going to affect us all. This could blow up around the globe. I mean, we could be looking at it affecting every person in this country. For one thing, militarily, if we're ever going to get involved in something that requires boots on the ground, and Ukraine is well aware of this, if the United States, we got to have a draft. Yeah, your young folks, our young folks, hell, even old men like me. I mean, that's what's happening in Ukraine. And that's what we're going to talk about today with our buddy Serge Tiagnyriadno. So let me bring this up on screen here because I want to read his live line introduction here. Singer-songwriter and musician Serge Tiagnyriadno returns to the podcast by George Liveline. He's a world-renowned Ukrainian singer, musician, songwriter, sound engineer. And, I have him on the show. I don't talk about this enough. I've seen him performing with Brian May. Yeah, that Brian May. That's how good this guy is. From the age of 13, he's been performing on the stage. He regularly works as a session instrumentalist and vocalist, and since 2008, he manages the Crystal Sound Recording Studio, which, in addition to its own projects, creates many Ukrainian and international audio products. That's where he's spending his time now. He's a holdout in his hometown of Kyiv, Ukraine. His wife and kids, they left when the war broke out for their safety, but he's always been there. He remained behind, and he's been providing a firsthand account of the life under siege. And he's also a pretty good, fair journalist also. And we like having him on the show just because of what he can tell us about what's happening on a daily basis in Ukraine. And these two things are linked, Ukraine and Gaza. We're going to report on that because of the commitment the United States has. And there has been some indications that they're starting to turn away from Ukraine now. And Sergey, I got to ask you, those news reports for you, for the folks in Ukraine, they've got to be chilling. What's your latest take?
Hello, everybody. Well, of course, that's terrible news from Israel and Gaza, and it's obviously that this war that started a week ago has the same roots as our war in Ukraine, because we have a lot of information that Russian militaries have been involved in the start of this conflict, and probably there's a possibility that the main idea was to turn away the focus from Ukraine to something else when they started this. But it seems that it goes completely in a wrong direction that's supposed to be. Well, that's terrible. Anything about war, about people losing their lives, their homes, is terrible. What can I say?
Well, and like I said, it's intrinsically linked here. The question is, will the United States support war on two fronts? Because and particularly if this goes sideways. Now, here's the reporting. I'm going to bring this up on screen that prompted me to reach out again to Serge. He's been on the show several times, obviously, talking about what's happening there in his home country. But this is from The Independent, and it reads, the White House warns the Israel crisis is stretching its ability to support Ukraine. And the quote is, running out of runway. Biden administration is moving with a sense of alacrity, as John Kirby says, and it won't be indefinite. Let me bring this up on screen here. The White House said it was running out of runway on supporting both Ukraine and Israel as U.S. Republican lawmakers warned they would protest any funding requests for military aid from the Biden administration for the two crisis-hit nations. Quote, I think in the immediate term, right now, we can continue to support with the authorities and the appropriations we have Israel and Ukraine. But, we're certainly running out of a runway, said John Kirby, a spokesperson for the National Security Council. Now, I've got this film clip, and Sergey may have seen this. Maybe he didn't, but I'm going to bring this up on screen, and I want people to watch this very closely because, this is what we're talking about here today. Let's play this.
The near term, we've got appropriations and authorities for both Ukraine and for Israel, but you don't want to be trying to bake in long-term support when you're at the end of the rope. And in Ukraine, on the Ukraine funding, we're coming near to the end of the rope.
Yeah, so that's John Kirby, and that's what he was talking about here as the situation in Gaza broke out. And if this gets really bad, who knows what's going to happen? And I wanted to talk about, everybody's talking about the counteroffensive and what's been happening in Ukraine. This thing has turned down to a murderous slog. People are dying in astronomically high numbers in Ukraine. We talked about Gaza. My God, the death and destruction, the casualty count continues to soar in Ukraine. Russia continues to hold on to its land that it's taken out in the eastern part of Ukraine, I think. And there doesn't appear to be any movement, any resolution in sight. There doesn't appear to be any prospect of any short-term or long-term winning in this war. Sergey, how's it look to you there in Kyiv? Where are we at on this thing?
Well, each day our military is fighting back some territories. Of course, it's not some huge amount of territories because they have fortifications through all over the front line, and it's almost 1,000 kilometers in Ukraine, so it can be that fast, but we have a big advance on the south front line, and on the eastern in the eastern region there's two places where the most terrible fightings going on. It's in Avdiivka and in Kupiansk, and Russian army is putting their terrible amount of soldiers to these two small villages, and they losing like 1,000 of soldiers each day, and they have no advance on these directions. But it also cost our militaries a lot of soldiers and a lot of technique to hold on these directions too. Well, we cannot predict how long it will take to fight back all the territories, and we cannot predict how long the war will be going on.
Yeah, and in this country, there's no upside to any of this. It's horrible. The only upside that I can think of in the coverage, mainstream media has really fallen down on their coverage. We may have to see some changes in the way things are done here as far as accuracy is concerned, and from the top right down to the bottom. And let's take a look at the top here, what a lot of people consider to be the top. This is the New York Times. Let me show this map now for people who are listening in audio. This is Ukraine, and this is the front line as of January 1st in 2023, the counteroffensive that we're talking about, and these very small gains that Sergey mentioned. Okay, so you can tell me whether or not you think this is accurate. So this is where it started. And now this says, despite 9 months of bloody fighting, less than 500 square miles of territory have changed hands. Now, that's territory changing hands. Thousands have died. A prolonged stalemate could weaken Western support for Ukraine. And it certainly is. Now, I've circled this. These are my circles. That front line that we showed here, these little blue and little red areas, you're going to have to strain to see this if you're watching in video, but these are just small margins, small portions of this front line that we're talking about. This is the counteroffensive. This is what has taken place since virtually the first of the year, and we're here in October. So Russia is hanging on to this eastern corridor. It looks to me like they're wanting, and they're going to keep this area leading down into Crimea. And there has been very little movement here, and the casualties have been horrific. Ukraine, believe it or not, has been criticized by some of these bloodlusty warmongers for being casualty adverse, but my God, they're taking plenty of casualties. And it looks to me, sir, that not much change is occurring. Do you agree with those maps? Is that what you're seeing there in Ukraine?
Yes, but if you will put the map of Israel to that territory that you just showed on the map, you will see that the entire Israel is just like one district in Ukraine. So you can imagine the scale of the fightings in Israel with Gaza and fightings in Ukraine with occupied territory. So that's uncomparable, I think. And the main thing that our military is doing while returning our territories, they trying to be very precise, and they attacking only military objects, and that's the biggest problem, that we cannot act like Russians did when they captured our territory, when they destroyed just entire cities like Mariupol. They still shelling Kharkiv each day. So that's because they have opportunity to do that, because it's close to the border. They shell in Sumy region each day. They shelling Kherson, which is under Ukrainian control right now, but the front line is so close that they can shell it with ordinary artillery. So of course, there's no possibility that our militaries will fight back all these territories immediately. That's
it's gonna. All right, so
it will take a lot of time and efforts to do that,
and a lot of lives. I'm gonna bring this up on screen. I had this on the show before. I might have had this up before when you were on, because this is going back to April. But the Ukraine war already with up to, get this, 354,000 casualties, likely to last past 2023. Now, this is according to U.S. documents. And this didn't come from WikiLeaks, I don't think, but it came from a source like that, Dateline Moscow. As many as 354,000 Russian and Ukrainian soldiers have been killed or injured in the Ukraine war, which is grinding towards a protracted conflict that may well last beyond 2023. I mean, that's a certainty, I think, according to a trove of purported U.S. intelligence documents posted online. If authentic, the documents, which look like secret U.S. assessments of the war, as well as some U.S. espionage against allies, offer rare insight into Washington's view of one of Europe's deadliest conflicts since World War II. Again, this is reporting in Reuters. Now, according to an assessment collated by the U.S. Defense Intelligence Agency, Russia has suffered 189,500 to 223,000 total casualties, including 35 to 43,000 killed in action and 154 to 180,000 wounded. Ukraine has suffered 124,500 to 131,000 total casualties, including 15,500 to 17,500 killed in action, and 109,000 to 113,500 wounded in action, according to the document entitled Russia/Ukraine, Assessed Combat Sustainability and Attrition. The figures are about 10 times bigger than any public casualty figures published by either Moscow or Kyiv. Okay, you can't trust these capitals when it comes to war. It's war. This is the most propagandized war probably in history. So what I do is I reach out to somebody like Serge here, because if those numbers were accurate, those bodies have got to be coming home. These are astronomical counts, 10 times higher than what the governments are saying. Serge, do you believe that? I mean, do you think that those statistics are accurate?
Well, I'm not sure if it's 10 times bigger or 5 times bigger, but obviously it's bigger,
Yeah,
especially from Russian side, because you know that they summoned to their army the prisoners, and one of the uh, units, not one, a lot of the units were filled with prisoners, and they just sent them to our positions, just to death. So they do not count their losses. They just send people until our soldiers will be out of ammos or something like that. So that's their tactic on most of the front line, and especially right now in Avdiivka and in Kupiansk, they act the same way. And of course, well, they have much more resources, I mean, people in Russia than in Ukraine, and probably their strategy is to take us by bigger numbers. Well, but of course, losses on both sides are very, very huge.
My God. And what he's talking about there are war crimes. When it comes to war crimes, I'm a believer in that, because all wars have war crimes. I mean, horrible things. Now, the one thing about it in Gaza, this decapitation of babies and children that they were talking about and video, that appears not to be true. The president of the United States took to the podium and said that in front of national media in this country. So again, you've got to look at your sources and understand that war propaganda is rampant here, but there definitely are war crimes taking place. And if you don't think so, think about in our country, Vietnam and My Lai and what occurred there. Go read Seymour Hersh's reporting on that. We don't have time for that, but let's bring this up on screen, because what we've been talking about here are soldiers. Now, this is maybe a little bit more independently verifiable, Sergey, because this is from the UN. The number of civilian casualties in Ukraine during Russia's invasion, verified by the OHCHR, that's the UN, from February 24th, 2022 to September 10th, 2023. So this is very recent. And you can see here in blue, these are the total. And then let me bring this up on screen a little bit bigger here so that we can see it. So these are killed and injured numbers. Killed on the left, injured on the right. In blue is the total figure, and in black are the children. My God,
Yeah.
these are children. So we're talking about total killed 9,614. Children 554. Civilians always take a massive hit in these wars. On the right, injured. These are I don't know why they say injured. These are wounded. These are people with blown off limbs. These are not injuries like paper cuts. These are not minor things. These are big time wounds. 17,535 total wounded civilians we're talking about here, not combatants, and 1,180 children that will never be the same because they've been wounded in this war in Ukraine. So that, again, was of September, and it is the civilian circumstance. Where are those civilians? Is that mostly in the eastern part of the country, not where you're at?
No.
Where's this taking place?
No, it's all over the Ukraine, because the shellings are everywhere. Well, we have like maybe last month, not so loud in Kyiv, because they were concentrated on the south in Odessa and in the western south near the Danube River. They've been shelling facilities that have grain facilities and ports in Odessa, and they've been trying to destroy infrastructure for grain exporting. That was their main goal during past 2 months, probably, or maybe even longer by now. And we're expecting, as it's coming colder, they will begin to shell our energy infrastructure anytime soon. So people dying everywhere, and a lot of people being slaughtered in Kyiv region, in Bucha and Irpin during first days of war. And looking at these numbers from United Nation Organization, you should understand that these are only verified and confirmed cases that have where people have been identified, and we know who it is in United Nations. So these numbers much bigger, especially in regions where Russian militaries are still controlling the territories, like on east and on south near Crimea. So cities like Mariupol being almost completely destroyed, and there were like 10,000, dozens of thousands of deaths, and we cannot verify all these people who died there. So these numbers not included in United Nations reports.
Yeah, and I got to jump in here. I encourage folks to comment, ask questions, show your support for Sergey. And this is everybody wants to know. So let's get this out of the way. How you doing? How you been?
Well, me personally, I'm pretty much the same. So, well, we had a lot of work in the studio during summer because of the shellings on the in the spring. We had a lot of postponed projects that we had to finish during the entire summer. So we've been working on them. Now we have, maybe last week, we have a much more free time here in the studio, but we are so exhausted that we had to rest for a while. But it doesn't work because to be in a emotionally positive state during the war, you have to do something. If you do nothing, you will mentally you will feel depressed. It affects your state of mind, obviously, all the shellings, all the death. So it's better to do something.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you about that because we're talking about a mental exhaustion here, and even me doing this podcast, doing the show. People have been warning about this for months, for years, and it looks like it's starting to happen. This thing going sideways that I talked about. This is mind-breaking, folks. I mean, this could be the world on fire. We could be experiencing what Sergey's country is experiencing every single day, everywhere. This is not a minor thing that we're talking about. Okay, that can be mentally exhausting. What about you as a musician? Now, music is a beautiful thing. You've got this great talent and skill, this wonderful, uplifting vocation that you have. But I got to tell you something. Doing the show, I'm getting a little depressed. I mean, I'm getting a little burnt out on this. Just what I do. How about what you do? What about the music? Is it affecting the music?
Well, I don't think it's affecting the music itself. I think the music is the main thing probably that helped us to survive mentally through all these days. Well, probably today is the 600th days of the war today. I think it's the anniversary, the sad anniversary today. So I think, and I'm happy that I can do some music and to do something in the studio. It helps a lot to be in a good condition mentally.
Let me ask you this question, and this is a good one, kind of a lead in here from Desert Mantis has been on my show before. Now, we hear a lot about corruption. We heard that a lot of the weapons weren't going to where they should in Ukraine. A lot of the money doesn't go where it's supposed to. Now, but this, again, we're propagandized in war. You can't believe everything. Now, this is what he says. I read a recent article about the UKR government encouraging citizens to make blood donations. Okay, that makes sense. I get that. However, the blood donations are being sold to Europe and the U.S. instead of UKR casualties. That doesn't seem. Does that seem right to you?
No, I don't think it's possible even.
Yeah.
Well,
I don't know how that could be. Again, the corruption is awful. I mean, that's what they're talking about here. But yeah, that was kind of a strange one. I don't know where that was seen or heard, but
well,
I hadn't heard that yet.
corruption, it's possible everywhere.
Yes.
And well,
We got it, boy.
obviously,
Yeah.
every country has a corruption on different levels, of course, obviously, but most of the cases are coming from propaganda and from mostly from Russian media that they are just trying to make some mess in our country and in relationships and with other countries. So that's understandable, and we're trying to not look at that way. Of course, there's a lot of corruption everywhere, but it's not the main problem. The only problem in the world is not corruption. It's Russian Federation by now, and it's officially that they have a dictatorship, and Putin is officially dictator according to pace since last week. So that's probably the main problem that our world should solve. Because it's a dictatorship with more than 150 million people in there.
Yeah, and he's living in the real world there, and we're trying to sift through what oftentimes is propaganda, as I mentioned. And people want to know, well, how do you determine what's real and what isn't? Well, one easy way is I talk about going with the racing form of history. Go with the people that have been correct. I had Chris Hedges' Substack on earlier. That guy has been right. I've never seen him be wrong. I followed him for years. Follow Chris Hedges' reporting. Now, here's another guy that I had on the show once before when Serge was on. This guy was right. He predicted the situation in Ukraine, and he had it right as far as the world stage is considered and what was going to happen a decade ago. Here's what he says now. He says, regrettably, there's no diplomatic solution in sight. This is from John Mearsheimer. John Mearsheimer's Substack. It's entitled John's Substack. Go there. Read that. Read these people. Read the racing form of history until they're wrong, and then, jump off the track. But this guy's been right, folks, right down the line. He says there are irreconcilable differences between the two sides over security guarantees for Ukraine and territory, which stands in the way of a meaningful peace agreement. For understandable reasons, Ukraine is deeply committed to getting back all the land it has lost to Russia, which includes, remember that map we had up earlier, Crimea and the Donetsk, Kherson, Luhansk, and Zaporizhia Oblast. But Moscow has already annexed those territories and made it clear that it has no intention of returning them to Kyiv. The other unresolvable issue concerns Ukraine's relationship with the West. For understandable reasons, Ukraine insists that it needs a security guarantee, which can only come from the U.S. and NATO. Russia, on the other hand, insists that Ukraine must be neutral and must end its security relationship with the West. In fact, that issue was the main cause of the present war, even if American and European foreign policy elites refuse to believe it. Moscow was unwilling to tolerate Ukraine joining NATO. It is extremely difficult, if not impossible, he says, to see how both sides can be satisfied on either territorial or neutrality issues. Okay, so I'm going to wrap this up here. But he says, in addition to those obstacles, both sides view each other as an existential threat, which is an enormous obstacle to any kind of meaningful compromise. We're talking about if we had peace talks, if we had diplomacy going on. It's virtually impossible at this point. It's hard to imagine, for example, the U.S. taking its gun sights off Russia in the foreseeable future. The most likely result is that the war will go on and eventually end in a frozen conflict, with Russia in possession of a significant portion of Ukrainian territory. But that outcome will not put an end to the competition and conflict between Russia and Ukraine, or Russia and the West. Well, whether or not his prediction is right, nobody knows, because we're talking about war here, and Sergei would be the first one to say that. But the one thing I think he's right about, you guys ain't giving up. Ukraine's not giving this battle, this war up, and certainly Russia isn't, regardless of what we have in the way of talks or negotiations or diplomacy. Am I correct in that?
Yes. Well, negotiations are possible, but there's very, very, very small possibility of this if Russian people will put away their government. They will elect some decent person to represent them, and only after that it is possible. Well, sorry, I have a battery off. 1 second.
Oh, okay, that's all right.
So that's the only possibility for negotiations, because no one will negotiate with a dictator Putin. That's obviously for everybody in the world. I think there is no sense in negotiating with him.
Yeah, obviously they have not been deterred to date anyway by this massive casualty count. You'd look at it and think, well, God, casualties will eventually dictate whether or not this thing gets resolved or settled. Somebody will say, no mas, no mas. But on Russia's side of the equation, as Sergei points out, not so much. This is from Victor Tiffany, a question for you, Sergei. Now, Victor is an astute observer out in the northeastern part of the United States. I've had him on my show a couple of times, probably. He says, how extensive is the resistance to the military draft in Ukraine? And again, he's probably put that in the context of our country. There was huge resistance to the military draft here in wartime. What's it like there?
Well, when the war just started, we have opposite situation. There were so many people that wanted to join the army that there was a big queue in each region. Well, right now the situation is more difficult because of many reasons. Well, of course, there's always people who are not ready to fight, and they are trying to avoid summoning to the army. But there's a lot of people who are ready to defend the country, and there's a lot of problems in organizing all that, because you probably can imagine the people who are in the army since the start of the war. They are there for almost 2 years, and they exhausted, and they need rotation, and it's a big work that our government is making right now to put enough of people in the army. And in the same time, everybody understands that it's impossible to summon all of the population in the army, because there should be some economics, there should be some professions that must cover life of the people who are stayed there. And right now, a lot of people are returning, those who fled during the start of the war, and a lot of people decide to get back in Ukraine and try to do something here. So that's a difficult question, but there's not much people who are resist to be summoned to army. Well, of course, obviously there are some, but it's not a very big problem right now.
Well, yeah, okay. Tell me if I've because this is the way that I think of it. I mean, you've got this massive war, this massive casualty count. You need to have soldiers. As Sergey mentioned early on, some people fled the country, young people in particular. Now, maybe some of those are coming back, like he talked about, but then you start to fill in the ranks with older populations, older demographics. I mean, you start off with the young people, and that's the worst thing always because these people are the future. My God, they may be able to solve or figure this kind of stuff out in the future, but they can't if they're dead. That's why I'm opposed to war because of the cannon fodder that young people turn into. You start to draft the older people. And then I heard recently that the medical profession, that women doctors even were being drafted in Ukraine because they're so desperately needed because of these casualties that we talked about. Have you heard that? Is that accurate?
Well, of course. It started, I believe, 1 year ago, and they just made some laws that allows a lot of women actually entered the army, and uh, a lot of them, yeah, they are medical stuff, but there's a lot of women fighting with on the battlefield actually. So that's not a problem. That's just option that um, our army is needed. So
Yeah.
that's not some problem that we have.
Well, and again, it just is an eye opener for people in this country. We don't think I don't think people here really have an understanding of what's happening over there as far as the casualties are concerned, the soldiers that are needed, the weaponry that's needed and been used. What the grim future of this is we've talked about. What about politics? Because everything in this country is politics, and I know the folks there are probably painfully aware that everything from the United States, well, not everything changes, but there are changes every 4 years in the administration. And we've got another election coming up here in 2024. What about Zelensky? Are there going to be elections in Ukraine? Is he going to be up? And what's your sense, your
Well,
take on his popularity? Because I know you were not a Zelensky guy. You told me that before the war. He was not a
yeah,
favorite of yours. Yeah.
and I'm still not. I don't think I will vote for him if there will be an elections. Well, but I don't think that elections during the war is a good idea because of many different things, and we should win the war and then make an election. So that's my opinion, and a lot of people here would agree with me. Well, it's not decided yet, as I know, but I hope there will be no elections till we will win this war.
Again, our time is wrapping up here. I like to go just to the top of the hour. We've got, I don't know, 10, 15 more minutes to talk to Sergey this morning. The Zelensky guy. I got to bring this up because, again, I talk about this propaganda, the fact that we're not getting the full accounting, the real picture, the big picture here as far as the media is concerned. This was a head shaker. This was a head snapper. This got a lot of play in the left-wing media circles. I don't know how much this was even reported in Ukraine, but this was
It was.
Bizarroville. Yeah. Canada's House Speaker resigns over inviting a man who fought for a Nazi unit to Parliament. Yeah, Parliament there in Canada, Toronto, Dateline AP. The Speaker of Canada's House of Commons resigned for inviting a man who fought for a Nazi military unit during World War II to Parliament to attend a speech by the Ukrainian president. Zelensky we're talking about here. Just after Zelensky delivered an address in the House of Commons Friday, Canadian lawmakers gave 98-year-old Yaroslav Hunka a standing ovation when Speaker Anthony Rota drew attention to him. Rota introduced Hunka as a war hero who fought for the 1st Ukrainian Division. We're talking about World War II here, folks. Observers over the weekend began to publicize the fact that the 1st Ukrainian Division also was known as the Waffen SS Galicia Division, or the SS 14th Waffen Division, a voluntary unit that was under command of the Nazis. And of course, this was a big debacle, public humiliation. The Speaker of their House resigned. Zelensky left town. Not much has been heard about it since then. How did this play out in Ukraine?
Yeah, we of course we had all these reports, but you should understand that. Obviously, I think that was just a mistake for them, and they didn't thought about the whole situation. But to understand the difficulty of understanding that the role of that person, you should get back in the history in times of Second World War and understand that Ukraine by the time was occupied by two countries, Soviet Union from one side, and actually by that time it was Germany on the other side, because they occupied Poland and other territories that are now Hungary and Romania, and these territories were under control of Germany, and there were a lot of people who were fighting in Ukraine with against both sides, against Soviet Union and against Germany. And of course, there were people who took some sides, who were fighting with on the side of Soviet Union and on the side of Germany. But most of the people in that region were trying to find some place where they can fight against both of them. So to understand what that person intentions were, we should be there and understand what he'd been fighting for. But as the Second World War ended, and all the people who were making war crimes probably were identified, so I think that's not a person who are following Nazis Germany ideas. Well, I don't think so. I don't know this guy, and I'm not even sure he's remembering it since he's 1980 years old.
He's old. Well, we got Nazis in this country. I mean, again, you don't need to go pointing fingers at other countries and other peoples when you got
of course,
circumstances. But some people say Ukraine has organized Nazism in its military. That you have Azov battalion and these sectors. They're not the majority, certainly, but they are active and they are powerful. How do you respond to that?
Yeah, but the most of this story is Russian propaganda. Of course, and you're talking about Azov military unit, and there were a few guys there who were have some identifications mark that probably related to Nazis, but there's a lot of people in every country that probably think they are Nazis, but it's important what they do and how they act than how they name themselves. So if they are defending our country against invasion of our enemy, so I don't think that they are acting like Nazis. They're defending their territory. If they do nothing illegal or something that is prohibited, I don't think that's a problem. And that unit that you mentioned, Azov, that was the main unit that been defending Mariupol for a few months without any support. They've been surrounded and they've been acting like heroes, actually. So Of course, probably there could be some few soldiers that had some Nazis ideas, but that was not the uh, not something that identifies this unit as something related to German Nazis.
Yeah, and I don't want to belabor the point. Again, people on the left here will say that those Nazis were brutalizing people in the eastern Ukraine, and that had something to do with why Russia took such extreme exception of it, because it was because they were Russian friendlies over there in the eastern Ukraine. Do you agree with that or not?
No, that's obvious right now. It's obvious that all the imagination of other people about reasons why Russia attacked and invaded Ukraine are completely nonsense, because there is no I don't know how to even say it.
That's all
There
right.
is no um, let's say probable reason for them to attack us, except the willing and accept the desire of their president Vladimir Putin. So during the time of 2014 till today, they had like thousands of reasons, and they changed these reasons like every week why they entered Ukraine. They at first they tried to help people who speak Russian on the territory of Donbass region.
Yeah.
Then they said that there were Nazis here. Then they said that they are
NATO,
fighting against NATO biological bases here, against genetically modified birds and insects. Well, there was like really thousands of reasons that they been propagating on official you can follow all these reasons if you will watch the archives of Russian TV and medias. And if you will try to think about it, you will understand that there were no reasons to do that, except the reason that they wanted to capture the territory, and that's all. And following these logic, we will come to a conclusion that if we will try to freeze this war and stop it and agree that okay, we will not lose people, but we will lose territories. In a few years, they will continue to do that.
Continue to take more territory, you're saying?
Yeah, obviously.
Yeah. Well, before we leave you here, as I mentioned, it kind of gets depressing and mind-breaking for me, the news of the day. And I don't have the missiles and drones flying over my home, and my neighbors and friends aren't under attack in that circumstance like you are. But I got to tell you, sir, hey, I'm getting to be an old man here. I mean, I've got more in the cart than I got out in front of the horse, obviously. And a lot of this that I talk about on my show is not getting resolved in my lifetime. I mean, I get real depressed. Now, you're younger than me. But your country, now those people can't be put back together that have been maimed and killed. Obviously, that's going to be a black mark on the history books forever. But what about Ukraine and your country? Can this, in your mind, ever be reassembled, and particularly maybe in your lifetime, or is this something that's not going to be changed while you and I are looking at it?
Well, we all hope for the best, and we hope that anytime soon something will be changed, and somehow something will be changed in Russia that will put the people that are in power there aside, but we all understand that it's not very possible, let's say that, and we are ready to continue our fight and take back everything that was taken from us. And everyone here understands that it probably can take decades, who knows, but we have no doubts that we will win this war and we will live in peaceful country. We all hope that it will be sooner than later, but
My God, yes. Let's make it yesterday because of what we have been talking about.
yeah,
Well, I want to give you a last word here because you've been very good to answer the questions and discuss the issues that I've brought up, including the Nazis and stuff like that. But um, yeah, and you can talk about anything here. Talk about the music if you want to give us some uplifting stuff. Talk about the websites and the causes that you continue to support, or whatever. Here, you get the last word, Sergey.
yeah. Well, right now we are not making any fundraisings because we were too busy to finish our projects, but uh, we hope that this year we will continue to do that. And well, I cannot say anything new, unfortunately. The war is going on and it's pretty much the same. Our militaries are fighting back some pieces of our land step by step, and it's really takes a lot of lives and a lot of um, power of Ukraine. But uh, I just can say that you should believe in us and we will win this war.
No, I
And
believe in you, pal.
I hope in Israel that there will
Yeah.
be some peace too, because uh, for I will tell it once again, for a lot of people here, it's obvious that there's some, like we say, some ears of Russia in that conflict too.
All right, pal. I mean, like I said, I love Sir Hay. This guy's world class, folks, and he's great to come on my show. You support him, believe in him, follow him. We'll get him
Thank you.
back on the show again here very soon. You stay safe and stay well. I hope the war stays away from your doorstep and your studio there, and you continue to make this great music. And I hope it's a happy song the next time we talk.
Thank you. Bye.
Yeah, fuck that. I mean, that's just great stuff. He's just a wonderful person there in a beautiful country that's just being brutalized beyond imagination. The loss of life is incomprehensible. And then what's happening to a beautiful country that's very similar to us, I think, in a lot of respects here in kind of the breadbasket of this country. A very beautiful country that's just being laid to waste. And folks, if you like seeing Sergey on the podcast by George Live Line, I'll have him back on. Subscribe, and you'll know when he's on. It's on Facebook and YouTube and live streams and video. And then, of course, you can also get the audio-only versions, which go up right after the show on, Apple Podcasts, the iHeartRadio app, Spotify, and places like that. But that's going to do it. That's going to wrap it up. That's all there is. And there ain't no more. That's another podcast by George.